Hello, welcome to my channel, Save Infinity. In this video, I just wanted to briefly kind of discuss, the aspect of twin flame or divine counterpart or inner union journeys, however you like to, define it, and if that resonates for you. But how so often, the idea of separation or what have you during such journeys can be seen as and discussed about in such a way of like it's a period for growth, to become more whole, almost in a way of saying to become more worthy when you kind of think about it in some aspects, which can kind of quickly go down a slippery slope of being more toxic than it needs to be. It's not about growing and becoming more worthy or to like prove yourself to be able to come into union for such a journey. As you already are worthy. You always are worthy in that aspect. No one is perfect in any sense, and the idea of growth from that aspect can go on for infinity. Growth can be infinite. There's never like an end to such a thing. So it's not like you need to reach a certain point of perfection in that way, because in those sort of aspects we already are perfect, and it's coming into that place of union with yourself where you already have that that inner self-love for yourself as you are, rather than trying to make yourself become or be something so then you get a tick of approval, or so then you give yourself that love. It's less about growth in that aspect as well, and more about healing as well, healing those sort of limitations and labels and such that we put on ourselves, and the sort of distorted view we view ourselves and others through, sort of healing those aspects so that we can have a healthier relationship with ourselves and others. And it's also, separation isn't about becoming worthy for love, but, about having the freedom to become and love yourself. Having that time to get more in tune with yourself, to learn more about yourself, to build, that relationship with yourself, and also, having that time to explore yourself and explore life and, explore all sorts of experiences that, you can't do when you're in union with another person, the sort of things you can only do in union with yourself. Being able to experience and enjoy and partake in things that life has to offer that you can't otherwise do when you are in a union with someone else. Getting to a point where you've met your own needs, ticked off some things on your own bucket list that you can't otherwise do in a union type circumstance. Doing that sort of inner union, that inner self-love, healing and experiencing that freedom with yourself, within yourself, to then be able to once you feel ready for that sort of point and next stage, you're then able to share that energy you've created and fulfilled within yourself in union with another. So it's not so much like all these tests you have to pass or something like that, like you're being assessed and graded and you need to prove yourself in certain aspects, but more about being ready in a sense of you feeling ready within yourself and you feeling content and happy enough within yourself to be ready for such a thing. That's where the divine timing in many aspects comes from. It's not divine timing in an aspect of, being assessed and graded, but divine timing in an aspect of, when you really are ready to settle down those roots in another way, once you've kind of, finished exploring and getting to know and exploring other aspects of your branches. And so often as well, there's such a big aspect on, divine timing and, destiny type aspects in that sort of, rhetoric. And while that, has a part to play in an aspect, it's still, about when you are ready, when the union energy within yourself is ready to be manifested into the physical reality. You're not always going to get, a big, bold, 100% assured, message from the universe. That it also has to be, decided within yourself, for yourself, and you also have to take those actions and steps towards those things in creating your own destiny, because you fundamentally do create and orchestrate your own destiny in those sort of aspects. You're not always feeling like your life and experience is at the whim of some, divine grand, panel of higher orchestrated beings or something like that. While all those sort of aspects do, have parts to play and, do weave in through, such an experience and journey, it's fundamentally still in your own hands in that way. And is being, also co-created and, co-orchestrated by yourself as well. You're not just here to listen to the orchestra play the music and, play certain notes, if you will. You're also here to be part of that orchestra, being an instrument within the orchestra and playing that music together in harmony. Not feeling like you're such like a puppet at the whims of, something outside of yourself, knowing it is, a co-creative process, and that you still, have control and also have steps and actions, to take and a part to play as well. And also knowing, that it's not so much like a review process where you have to, prove yourself worthy, or you have to do a certain amount of, growth and steps or what have you to be worthy of such a thing. You always are worthy of such a thing. It's more just when your energy and, inner state and being is ready for such a thing, in a way that, you've healed enough, you've explored enough, you've experienced enough, you've, done all that sort of aspect that, you really are ready to then, explore a new chapter, setting your roots down into that new chapter, but just not doing prematurely, because there is no rush and urgency for such things, not doing so because it feels like that's, the timing or need for something else outside of yourself, but doing so when it feels, ready and aligned within your own self, taking your own authoritative control in that aspect. And so these, periods of, doing things alone by yourself in that way isn't, like a punishment or a waiting period or all that sort of thing. It's just an opportunity to come into tune with all those sort of energies and directions and decisions and, wants, needs and desires within your own self, to then be able to write your own story moving forward in a way that really benefits you as a character so much more than rather than just, taking a pre-scripted story and trying to shove yourself into it, or having, one just thrown onto you. Really taking that time to, explore and come into your own truth and your own feelings and, your own wants, needs, desires and what have you, in a way that feels healthy and resonant and aligned for you, not out of, lower vibrational energies of, lack or, stress or fear or greed or any of that sort of stuff, but through energies that feel aligned in a way that are fulfilling you and are, what you truly do want to experience and delve into. Alright, well, might leave this one here for now. Sending you so much peace, love, light, and blessings as always. Bye.